In the heart of Tallahassee, Florida, the Leon County Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice, its marble columns gleaming under the midday sun. But inside, the air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves knew they were about to witness history. The courtroom was packed, lawyers, reporters, and spectators crammed into every available space, their whispers buzzing like static before a storm. At the center of it all was Judge William Carter, his steely gaze fixed on the man standing before him, Governor Ron DeSantis. Carter's voice thundered through the room, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. Governor DeSantis, you've been given every opportunity to explain yourself, yet you stand here with nothing but excuses. This court will not tolerate such blatant disrespect for the law. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, leaving the room in stunned silence. DeSantis, usually composed and defiant, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched as he tried to maintain his trademark confidence. But before the governor could respond, the double doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open with a deafening crash. All eyes turned as a team of FBI agents, dressed in dark suits and wearing grim expressions, marched down the aisle. Ronald DeSantis, the lead agent, barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "You are under arrest for federal crimes against the United States." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would soon flood every news outlet in the country. DeSantis' face went pale, his hands trembling as the agents closed in. Judge Carter leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as the room descended into chaos. This was no ordinary trial. This was the day Florida's most powerful man, and the FBI, was there to make sure he didn't walk away unscathed. Jake Harper sat in the third row, his notebook balanced on his knee, pen poised to capture every detail. As a seasoned reporter for the Florida Tribune, he'd covered his share of high-profile cases, but nothing like this. The trial of Governor Ron DeSantis had gripped the nation, and Jake knew this story could make or break his career. He glanced at his phone. DeSantis' trial was already trending on Twitter, with thousands of posts pouring in every minute. "This is it," he muttered under his breath. The story of the decade. The case had started as a seemingly routine lawsuit over one of DeSantis' controversial executive orders, this time regarding election security measures that critics claimed suppressed voter turnout. But as the trial unfolded, whispers of a larger conspiracy had begun to surface. Rumors of backroom deals, shadowy figures, and evidence that could do more than just tarnish the governor's reputation. Jake had overheard chatter in the press room. There was talk of a key witness, someone with insider knowledge from DeSantis' inner circle. If that was true, it could change everything. He scanned the room, taking mental notes of the key players. To his left, the prosecution team huddled around a stack of documents, their faces grim but determined. To his right, DeSantis' legal team sat rigid, their eyes darting nervously between their client and the judge. And at the center, Judge William Carter, man, known for his no-nonsense approach and unwavering commitment to the law. Jake had covered Carter's cases before. He was a bulldog in a robe, unafraid to take on the powerful. Today, that powerful figure was Ron DeSantis. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd, and the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and anticipation. Reporters lined the back walls, their cameras trained on the front, ready to capture the moment the trial resumed. Jake could feel the tension in his bones. This wasn't just a trial. It was a spectacle, a clash between two titans of Florida's political and judicial worlds. As the clock struck 10 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Carter." The room stood in unison, a sea of bodies moving as one. Carter strode in, his black robe billowing behind him, and took his seat at the bench. His eyes swept the room, lingering briefly on DeSantis before he spoke. "Be seated," he commanded. The room obeyed, and an eerie silence settled over the crowd. Jake leaned forward, pen at the ready. Whatever happened next, he knew it would be unforgettable. Emily Torres, DeSantis' chief aide, sat directly behind the defense table, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She'd been by the governor's side since his first campaign, and in all those years, she'd never seen him like teeth on edge, defensive, almost scared. She'd warned him about this trial, begged him to take it seriously, but he'd brushed her off with his usual bravado. Just another political hit job, he'd said. They've got nothing. But Emily knew better. She'd seen the documents, the emails, the late-night meetings with people who shouldn't have been in the governor's office. There were things DeSantis had done, things she'd helped cover up that could destroy them both if they came alight. And now, with Judge Carter presiding, she feared the worst. Carter wasn't like other judges. He couldn't be bought or intimidated. If there was dirt, he'd find it. As the trial progressed, Emily's stomach churned. Each question Carter asked was like a dagger, sharper and more precise than the last. DeSantis stumbled over his answers, his responses vague and unconvincing. She could see the frustration building in Carter's eyes, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he lost patience. Outside the courthouse, Marcus Lee stood in the middle of a crowd of protesters, his fist raised in defiance. He'd driven 3 hours from Miami to be here to make his voice heard. The sign in his hand read, "DeSantis must go," and he chanted along with the others, their voices blending into a chorus of anger and hope. For Marcus, this trial wasn't just about election loss, it was about accountability. DeSantis had spent years trampling on the rights of Florida's most vulnerable, and now, finally, he was being held to account. But as the hours ticked by, Marcus's hope began to waver. He'd seen too many powerful men walk free, their crimes buried under legal technicalities. Would this time be different? He glanced at his phone, scrolling through live updates from inside the courtroom. The headlines were brutal. DeSantis grilled by Judge Carter, governor struggles to defend executive order. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Inside, the trial was heating up. Judge Carter leaned forward, his voice calm but laced with disdain. "Governor DeSantis, your administration has repeatedly claimed that these measures were necessary to ensure election integrity. Yet the evidence shows no significant fraud. How do you explain this discrepancy?" DeSantis cleared his throat, his eyes darting to his lawyers for support. "Your Honor, I believe the data speaks for itself. We had to act to protect the sanctity of the vote." Carter's brow furrowed. "The data? Governor, the data shows the opposite. Even your own experts testified that fraud was negligible. So I ask again, why push these restrictions?" The room held its breath. DeSantis opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He was cornered, and everyone knew it. At that moment, the prosecution stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce new evidencia, series of emails that show the governor's office knew there was no fraud, but pushed the narrative anyway." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jake's pen flew across his notepad. This was a bombshell. Carter nodded. "Proceed." The prosecutor held up a printed email, projecting it onto the screen for all to see. This email, dated 3 months before the executive order, is from a senior advisor to Governor DeSantis. It reads, "The fraud claims are baseless, but we can use this to rally the base. Push the narrative hard." The courtroom erupted. DeSantis's face turned ashen, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Fat Hat's taken out of context," he stammered. But Carter wasn't having it. "Out of context? Governor, this is your advisor admitting that your policy was based on a lie. How do you expect this court to overlook that?" DeSantis had no answer. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Jake could feel the story slipping into uncharted territory. Whatever came next, it was going to be explosive. The prosecutor held up a printed email, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the courtroom. This email, dated 3 months before the executive order, comes from Governor DeSantis' senior advisor. It reads, "The fraud claims are baseless, but we can use this to rally the base. Push the narrative hard." A murmur rippled through the room. DeSantis' face went pale, his usual confidence replaced by a flicker of panic. "Fat Hat's taken out of context," he stammered, his voice unsteady. Judge Carter leaned forward, his sharp gaze locking onto the governor. "Out of context? Governor, This is your own advisor admitting that your policy was built on a fabrication. How do you expect this court to ignore that? The buzz in the courtroom grew louder. Jake, the journalist seated near the front, scribbled furiously in his notebook, capturing every word of the exchange. Emily, DeSantis' aide, felt her pulse quicken. This was bad, catastrophically bad. She glanced at her boss, hoping he'd muster some kind of defense, but he looked lost, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Your Honor," DeSantis said, his tone shaky. "I acted on the best information available at the time. We had to protect the integrity of our elections." Carter snorted, a rare breach of his judicial composure. "The best information? Governor, the evidence shows there was no fraud. Your own experts testified to that under oath. This was a political stunt, plain and simple." The prosecutor rose again, holding another file. "Your Honor, we have additional evidencia recording of a conversation between Governor DeSantis and a known lobbyist, discussing campaign contributions in exchange for favorable policies." A heavy silence descended. Jake's pen froze mid-sentence, his breath catching in his chest. "Proceed," Carter said, his voice calm, but his eyes burning with intensity. The prosecutor pressed play on a small device. DeSantis' voice crackled through the speakers. "Unmistakable. If you can guarantee the funds, I'll make sure the regulations are flexible." Gasps echoed around the room. DeSantis' face drained of all color. "That's note he didn't mean." Carter slammed his gavel down, the sound sharp and final. "Enough. Governor, this court will not tolerate corruption. You've disgraced your office and the people of Florida." Emily's mind raced. She needed to act, to spin this somehow, but the evidence was overwhelming. Carter was relentless, and the room was turning against them. Outside, Marcus, a protester who'd been following the trial, watched the live feed on his phone. His heart pounded with a mix of hope and disbelief. "This is it," he muttered to himself. "They're finally going to hold him accountable." Back inside, the prosecutor stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we'd like to call a surprise witness, a former aide to Governor DeSantis, who has agreed to testify." A young woman, Sarah Thompson, walked to the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she swore the oath. "Ms. Thompson," the prosecutor began, "can you tell us about the governor's involvement in the election security measures?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes, I was in the room when the decision was made. It wasn't about security, it was about suppressing votes in districts that didn't support the governor." The courtroom erupted. Spectators whispered, jurors shifted in their seats, and Jake's pen flew across the page, documenting the bombshell revelation. DeSantis shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. She's lying." Carter banged his gavel again. "Sit down, Governor. You'll have your chance to respond." But DeSantis was unraveling. His fist clenched, his voice rising. "This is a setup. You're all against me." Carter's tone turned icy. "Governor, compose yourself, or I'll hold you in contempt." Emily watched in horror as her boss fell apart. She'd seen him charm crowds and deflect scandals, but now he was a cornered animal, as she feared her career was collapsing with him. Jake felt the tension in the room thicken, a palpable weight pressing down on everyone. The air hummed with anticipation, as if the next moment would tip the scales irrevocably. The prosecutor pressed on, presenting documents that corroborated Sarah's testimony, internal memos, meeting notes, all painting a damning picture of calculated deceit. DeSantis tried to interject, his arguments growing weaker with each attempt. "I was protecting the state," he insisted, but the words sounded hollow, drowned out by the mounting evidence. Carter's patience visibly waned. His questions grew sharper, his rulings more decisive. "Governor, you've offered nothing but excuses," he said at one point, his voice cutting like a blade. "The people of Florida deserve better than this." Emily scribbled a note, sliding it to DeSantis. "Stay calm. We can recover," but he barely glanced at it, his focus shattered. Outside, the crowd of protesters swelled, their chants growing louder as news of the testimony spread. Marcus joined in, his voice hoarse but triumphant. Inside, Jake noted the jurors' expressions, some shocked, others grimly satisfied. The atmosphere had shifted. The governor's guilt seemed almost tangible now. As the session neared its end, the prosecutor delivered one final blow, a financial trail linking DeSantis to the lobbyist contributions. This isn't just negligence, the prosecutor concluded. It's corruption, plain and deliberate. DeSantis slumped in his chair, defeated. Carter's gavel fell once more, signaling a recess, but the tension lingered, heavy and unresolved. When the court reconvened, Judge Carter rose from his chair, his black robe billowing like a storm cloud. He pointed directly at DeSantis, his voice booming with authority. Governor Ron DeSantis, you have abused your power, betrayed the trust of your constituents, and undermined the very foundation of our democracy. This court will not stand for it. You are a disgrace to the office you hold, and your actions have shamed this state. DeSantis opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He scanned the room desperately, seeking an ally, a lifeline, but found only stony faces staring back. His hands trembled slightly, the weight of Carter's words sinking in. The courtroom held its breath. Then, the double doors at the back burst open with a thunderous crash. A team of FBI agents stormed in, their dark suits stark against the room's muted tones. Ronald DeSantis, the lead agent, barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. You are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States and multiple corruption charges. Chaos erupted. Camera flashes blinded the room. Reporters shouted over each other, and spectators gasped in unison. DeSantis's knees buckled, his body slumping against the table. This can't be happening, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I'm the governor. The agents moved with precision, surrounding him in seconds. One produced a pair of handcuffs, glinting under the fluorescent lights. Sir, please turn around, the agent said, his tone firm but devoid of emotion. Emily stood frozen, her mind a blank slate. This wasn't just a setback, it was a public execution of everything she'd worked for. Her hands shook as she watched the agents close in. Outside, Marcus and the protesters erupted into cheers, their voices filtering through the walls. Justice, they roared. Finally, justice. Jake's fingers danced across his laptop, typing out the headline as it formed in his mind. DeSantis arrested in courtroom after judge's scathing rebuke. He glanced up, catching the moment the cuffs clicked around DeSantis's wrists. The governor's head hung low, his once commanding presence reduced to a shell of itself. The room descended into pandemonium. Reporters jostled for position, jurors whispered among themselves, and the bailiff struggled to restore order. The FBI agents escorted DeSantis toward the exit, their steps measured and unyielding. He cast one last look at the Galleria, mix of defiance and despair before disappearing through the doors. Emily sank into her chair, her career flashing before her eyes. The media frenzy would devour them all, and she knew it. Outside, the protesters' chants grew deafening, a wave of triumph crashing against the courthouse walls. Marcus raised his fist, tears stinging his eyes as he watched history unfold. Judge Carter remained seated, his expression unreadable behind the bench. He'd delivered justice, but the cost was etched into the lines of his face. The courtroom buzzed with activity, yet for a fleeting moment, time seemed to pause. The air was thick with the weight of what had just happened, a governor humbled, a system tested, a nation watching. As the agents vanished with DeSantis in tow, the reality settled in. This was no ordinary trial. It was a reckoning, one that would echo far beyond the walls of this courtroom, forever altering the landscape of Florida and beyond. After Governor Ron DeSantis was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a stunned silence fell over the room. Judge Carter, still seated at the bench, rose slowly, his gaze sweeping across the space as if assessing the weight of what had just transpired. Court is adjourned, he declared, his voice echoing through the stillness. The sharp rap of his gavel sounded again, but this time it felt like the final nail in the coffin of DeSantis's political career. Jake Harper, a journalist, typed furiously on his laptop, capturing every detail of the chaotic scene. He knew his story would dominate national headlines by morning. Having covered major trials before, nothing compared to Thesa, sitting governor arrested in open court, publicly humiliated by a judge. Glancing at his notes, his heart raced. DeSantis humiliated and arrested in courtroom shocker, he muttered, picturing the headlines splashed across the Florida Tribune's front page. At the back of the room, Emily Torres, DeSantis' aide, felt her world collapse. She had spent her career crafting the governor's image, but now it lay in ruins. Her trembling hands pulled out her phone to call political allies, but no one picked up. It was as if she were sinking in a nightmare with no escape. Will I go down with him? She wondered, fear flooding her mind. With the FBI involved, she knew too much to feel safe. Outside, the crowd of protesters erupted in cheers. Marcus Lee, a demonstrator from Miami, couldn't believe his eyes. After months of rallying against DeSantis' policies, justice had finally prevailed. Raising his fist, tears welling up, he shouted with the crowd, "Justice for Florida!" Their chants reverberated through the courthouse walls, a triumphant roar. For Marcus, this wasn't just a legal victory, it was a win for the people, proof that even the powerful could fall. Inside, reporters scrambled to file their stories. Cameras flashed relentlessly, and political pundits began debating DeSantis' future. Is this the end of his career? One reporter asked in her microphone. Or the start of a bigger scandal? Jake listened, aware that the answer could reshape Florida's political landscape for years. As the courtroom emptied, Jake headed for the exit, craving fresh air to process the moment. Stepping outside, he saw the crowd still gathered, phones aloft, recording history. He knew videos of DeSantis' arrest would flood social media within minutes, fueling news cycles for weeks. Emily lingered in the courtroom, an odd emptiness settling over her. She'd spent so long defending DeSantis, and now she was directionless. Gathering her things, she slipped out quietly, hoping to fade from the spotlight. But she knew the press would come for her eventually, forcing her to face the consequences. Marcus, meanwhile, felt profound relief. He'd fought for this day, and now a burden lifted from his shoulders. Turning to a fellow protester, he hugged them, tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he choked out. "We really did it." As the sun set over Tallahassee, the story of Ron DeSantis' downfall spread nationwide. Headlines screamed from every corner of the internet. Florida governor arrested in dramatic courtroom showdown. FBI steps in after judge humiliates DeSantis. A moment where power met justice. Beneath the sensationalism lay a simple, powerful message. No one, not even a governor, was above the law. Judge Carter, who had stood firm against one of the state's most powerful figures, emerged as a symbol of judicial integrity. His unwavering pursuit of truth, regardless of political fallout, sent a clear signal. Justice was blind. To many, he was the hero of the tale, a reminder that the system, though flawed, could correct itself when the right people took a stand. For Jake Harper, this was a career-defining moment. His article, headlined "DeSantis Humiliated and Arrested in Courtroom Shocker," became the Florida Tribune's most read piece ever. Yet beyond the views and acclaim, it was about the power of truth. He'd witnessed the system work, holding the powerful accountable, and he hoped his story would inspire others to keep fighting for justice. Emily Torres faced an uncertain future. As one of DeSantis' closest aides, she knew investigations would persist, and her role might soon be exposed. Driving home that night, a thought crept in. Maybe this was a chance to start over, free from the lies and compromises that had defined her career. For Marcus Lee, the day was a lasting triumph for the people. He'd seen the strength of collective action, of standing against injustice. And though the fight wasn't over, justice had won to die a victory worth celebrating. As DeSantis was led away in handcuffs, the nation watched, wondering if this marked the end of his reign or the beginning of a deeper scandal. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. The Tallahassee courtroom had become a beacon of accountability, A reminder that in America, no one stood above the law. Stood above the law. Stood above the law. Stood above